All right, so yes, another floating shelf video. How many could YouTube possibly need, right? Well, most of the videos I've seen involve using expensive power tools, table saws, miter saws, brad nailers, things that people don't always have access to. So today we're going to build a set of shelves using basic tools only. So today we've got a drill, a hammer, and a jigsaw, although you could absolutely use a circular saw here. Now, most people either have these things or know somebody that they could borrow one from, and that's really the point of today's video, is that if you're comfortable using these basic tools, you're going to be able to follow along and build it right along with me. All right, so for our actual materials, we're going to be using some 1/2-inch plywood. It's going to be pre-cut in a 2-foot by 2-foot section, as well as some 1x2 pine. And you can find both of these things at your local home center. There's going to be a couple of other odds and ends that, of course, I'm going to put a full list of the materials down in the description as always. All right, so enough with the intro, let's get building. The first thing I'm doing here is running a piece of painter's tape down the center of the board where the first cut will be. Plywood is prone to chipping out along the cut, especially when using tools like a jigsaw that tend to be a little rough with the blade. This tape will actually help eliminate most of the chip out and leave us with a much nicer looking cut. We're going to be cutting this board in half, and then cutting each of those pieces in half as well, leaving us with 4 equal-sized pieces for the tops and bottoms of the shelves. I'm starting by marking a line down the center of the board. Next, I align the jigsaw blade with the center line, then place a straight edge up against the jigsaw base. When I take the jigsaw away and mark where the straight edge is, I then have a measurement of where the straight edge needs to be in relation to the cut line in order to act as a guide for my jigsaw. By measuring the same distance away from the other side, I can ensure the straight edge is square to my cut line. Now, this method is commonly used for both circular saws and jigsaws and can be used as a substitution for a table saw. You do want to make sure you have enough clearance under the piece to be cut so that the blade does not damage the work surface. When making the cut, you want to hold the straight edge down as firmly as you can. If you have clamps, they really help here, but you just want to make sure the guide doesn't move at all. Now, of course, a table saw with a proper fence is going to give a much more precise cut, but this is just to show that you don't have to have all those expensive tools to start making things. As you're moving the saw along, apply gentle inward pressure towards the guide. This will keep the blade steady along your cut line. Now we're going to use our cut sections of 1/2-inch ply to measure out the 1x2 sides. Flush up the ends on one side and mark the other. Make this cut and you'll have your front side. Now when I'm measuring the sides here, I'm actually going to leave them a little long, and I'll show you why in just a minute. Now it's time to begin assembling the box, and I'm going super basic here. Spread a thin line of wood glue along the top of the front face, and spread it out using a finger or brush. Next, line up the edge of the top with the edge of the front and drive a few finishing nails down to secure it in place. I'm using the 2 side pieces as temporary supports under the top so that it doesn't get all wobbly on me. Once the nails are in, you'll want to go back with a nail set to sink the heads of the nails just under the surface of the wood. This will allow us to come back later and fill those areas in with something to make the nails disappear. Nail sets are only a few bucks, but if you don't want to pick one up for just this project, you can technically use a Phillips head screwdriver to do the same thing, but be warned, you may ruin the tip doing it. You'll want to try your best to align the edges as best you can during the assembly, but if you have some uneven spots here and there, don't worry, we're going to come back and fix those in just a minute. We're going to repeat this process all the way around until we have an assembled box. Once everything is nice and secure, we're going to take our jigsaw and cut the protruding ends off the sides flush with the rest of the box. I'm doing it this way to prevent accidentally cutting them too short during the initial cuts, which will leave an unsightly gap when we go to place the shelf on the wall. So now we have the main body of the shelf and it's time to do some rough cleanup. I'm using some 120 grit sandpaper here to knock down any higher spots and uneven edges. Once the box is cleaned up, it's time to make our mounting bracket. We're using some of the same 1x2s that we use for the sides, and we're basically making an E shape that will mount to the wall. Measurements aren't terribly important here, just as long as the base of the bracket is shorter than the box opening, and the prongs are short enough to allow the box to slip all the way over the entire bracket. The shelf box will end up slipping over this bracket, so before install you want to make sure that they fit together. If it's a little too tight, just sand down the problem areas until you can get it all the way in. Alright, so now that we have our boxes built and sanded down, there's one more step that we have to do before we paint them, and that's because this edge grain right here will soak up the paint differently and it'll show through to the final product. It doesn't matter how many coats of paint you coat this with, it's still going to look differently. So we have to seal this end grain with something, and the way that I like to do that is with drywall compound. Now, normally I keep a bag of ready-to-mix drywall compound at my workbench, but today we're going to be using this pre-mixed stuff, but it's going to be a little bit dry for what we're going to need it for. It's great for patching small holes, but we're going to want to butter this thing on like icing, so we're going to need to add a little bit of water to it here. This step may seem like a giant pain, but I promise it's really not. The key to working with drywall compound is not to mess with it too much and try to make it perfect when putting on. The most important thing to remember is that we're trying to fill in any low areas. Little bumps and ridges left by the putty knife will easily be sanded out during the next step. You'll also want to make sure you hit all the nail holes as well. After the paint color is completely gone and it's all dry, come back and hit it with your sandpaper to smooth everything out. Drywall dust is very fine and not great to breathe, so make sure you mask up during this process. Once all the edges are nice and square and you're happy with how they look, give them a good wipe down to get all the extra dust off. Alright, so now that all the edges are nice and even, we're moving on to painting. And painting anything furniture related itself is just a labyrinth of rabbit holes that I'm not really going to have time to get to on this video. My usual go-to is getting a high-end paint such as Benjamin Moore Advanced and using a foam roller to get a nice smooth appearance. But in the spirit of this video, we're going to be using spray paint. Now, spray paint gets a really bad rap, and it's usually because people spray it too close and spray too much. So the key here is going to be not too close and using a couple very light coats. So we're going to cover the whole thing with a primer, and then we're going to come back and use this Krylon chalky finish white paint. I've never used this stuff before, so we'll see how it looks in the end. These actually came out really nice. They're not perfect, but they're perfectly acceptable. And that's the great thing about this technique is that you can spend as much or as little time kind of fine tuning and adding drywall compound and sanding it off where you think you need it. Now that these are done, there's one more thing left to do. Let's go mount them to the wall. You can either screw the mounting bracket straight into the studs or use drywall anchors. If you do go with anchors, just make sure they're rated for the kind of weight you plan on placing on the shelves. Using a level while mounting your brackets will also ensure the shelf itself goes on level. Now I have a nice simple shelf ready for decor. I ended up making some for both the nursery as well as a bathroom, and I love how they came out. Thanks for watching. I've got a ton more content on the way, so be sure to come back and check it out.